This is Warren Vanderhill with the Center for Middletown Studies project on Muncie's service providers, and today it's my great pleasure to be interviewing a fellow New Yorker, Jason Newman, who is the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club. The date is November 26th, 2018, and I want to begin by thanking you for participating in our project, and I'd like you to begin our interview today with doing a little bit of what I call using the Wayback Machine. And since I know where you're going to go back to Queens and tell me a little bit about your life there, and then eventually get out here.
Oh, well, start young. We moved to Queens when I was a year old. We had been in Washington, D.C. before that. My father was a lawyer with the Justice Department during the Nixon years. Mm-hmm. And then he got an offer with a private firm in New York City, so we moved to New York, which is where he and my mother had grown up. So we moved to Hollis, Queens in 1973. And it was, at that point, it was a neighborhood that was really more of a working class neighborhood. Yeah. And it was a lot of younger families with not a lot of kids. So really, on our block, there were three of us. I mean, there was me, my older brother, and then his friend Charlie, who lived down the block. So there wasn't a lot for us. There wasn't a lot of socialization right there in Queens. So we did a lot of, my brother and I were very smart, and we were bused clear across town from Hollis to Douglaston, Queens, to go to school in, sort of advanced classes. Right. Which is just almost a good idea. You put all the nerds on a bus.
Right. From the middle of Queens to the North Shore.
Yes. So everybody knew who we were. And, Little League was a couple of miles away. Yeah. Hebrew School was a couple of miles away. The YMCA was a couple of miles away. So at that time, we made our way around Queens a lot on our own. Mm-hmm. So we'd bike to tennis lessons or swimming lessons or Hebrew School or things like that. And, even more so after my parents divorced in 1976. Mm-hmm. So we were pretty young when that happened. My father moved to Brooklyn. My mother kept the house in Queens. So we also did a lot of transitioning back and forth between Brooklyn and Queens. Learned very early on how to ride the subway. Yeah. We were on the very first stop of the F train and go clear through, Queens and Manhattan, and then, the second or third stop off the F train in Brooklyn. So it was in, we really didn't have a neighborhood feel there in Queens. In Brooklyn, there was a little bit more of that. It was at that point, my father and mother were both doing a little bit better professionally. Brooklyn Heights was a much more, middle class, upper middle class neighborhood. So there were a lot more kids kind of around us. Mm-hmm. But still, because, I was the weekend kid at that point. There wasn't that kind of sense of community. Mm-hmm. I was an outsider there. I was an outsider in Queens because there weren't kids in our neighborhood. And then, just kind of went through school there in Queens, went to Q Forest High School. Mm-hmm. At that point, they had the three specialized schools, Stuyvesant, Brooklyn Tech, and Bronx Science. Right. And, both my brother and I had gotten into Brooklyn Tech. My brother went to Brooklyn Tech for a year and then went to Stuyvesant. Okay. When it came time for me to take the test, I got into Brooklyn Tech. And I was going to go there until one of my brother's former classmates had been arrested for murder. So my parents said, okay, well, you're not going there. Yeah. So really I only had two other choices. Three. I tried out for the School of Performing Arts as an actor. My grades weren't good enough and I wasn't talented enough. So at that point I had two choices between Q Forest High School and Packer Collegiate. And I went to Q Forest High School. They had a little bit of a better history, a little bit of a better reputation. Yeah. It was closer to my mother. Graduated from high school in 4 years, and then I started school at the University of Delaware as a philosophy major. I thought I'd follow my dad into the law. And then after, I did a little bit too much having fun that first semester. So they said, you can come back, but you can't live on campus. And the commute from Brooklyn to Delaware was a little long for me. Yeah. So I transferred to a community college in Brooklyn, St. Francis College, and my father kind of said, "Okay, I paid for the first one. The rest is you." So I actually started to become a whole lot more serious about school and working through school. So I was dean's list there and took every semester I could until I could transfer over to NYU, which I did in '92. And I graduated from NYU. So I did 3 colleges. I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism, and I did it in 4 years. Because once I had goofed off enough, I buckled down. I'd worked my way through college in a financial consulting firm, working my way up from the mail room to a secretary to the office manager. When I graduated, I stayed around for about 5 or 6 months, and one of the partners offered me a partnership and said, "But we need a 3-year commitment." Now, 22, I'm doing the math, and I'm going to be 25 when this is done, and that's old. And I wasn't ready for that kind of commitment. So I said, "No, thank you," and I left. And I bounced around a little bit because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And then my stepmother was working as a substitute teacher at a preschool in Brooklyn. And one day, one of the teachers called her and said, "Hey, would you like to work?" And she said, "Well, my son is good with kids and he's out of work. Why don't you call him?" And they did. And I got some work as a substitute. And then one of the teachers got pregnant and they needed somebody to cover her maternity leave. So it was between me and another woman for that job. And they made the right call. They went with the other person. She had a degree, she had experience. I'd been doing that for about 4 months. The first time that I really got community help was all of the other teachers in the school thought they were wrong. And so they started calling out sick and calling me in as the sub. And so I was working 2-3 days a week every week for the rest of that school year, to the point when the board of directors fired that director and hired one of the teachers. I was her first hire. And so that ever since then I've been working with kids. And I got a little bit of management experience because living in New York is expensive. And my first salary as a preschool teacher was $14,500 a year, paid once a month. And we were living on the Upper East Side at that point, with a 1-bedroom, 6th-floor walk-up at about $11.50 a month. So thankfully, the woman I was living with made a little bit more money than I did, but not enough to bridge that gap. So I had second jobs as basketball coach, a gymnastics coach, and then running our after-school program and our summer camp program. At that point, I started to want to move beyond just the classroom, I knew that wasn't going to happen there. At the same time, my brother was starting a family in Philadelphia, and we had drifted apart, from very young. And, he said, "Why don't you come out here and you can live with us and work or not work, do whatever you want to do." And I, being me, I had to work. So I moved out there and I got a job as a preschool teacher in King of Prussia. And, I was doing a seminar on music in the classroom when Jack Law, the COO of the Boys and Girls Club of Philadelphia, was there. And he said, "I like what you had to say. Why don't you come interview with us?" And I got that job as the preschool director of the largest club in Philadelphia. Was there for a little bit as the preschool director, and then there was a change in CEOs and a reshuffling of personnel. And so in addition to the preschool, they gave me elementary and teen programming for the largest club in Philadelphia. And I love that because that really, I think with my childhood and then moving into the club, I was able to see, even though I was very fortunate in a lot of ways, that there were things I could have gotten at the club that I needed. And I didn't know I needed them until I saw them. And so I was there for about 12 years. And, about 4 or 5 years ago, I started again to get that hey, I think I'm ready to move on to something different, which was a difficult jump from. I was the number 2 at one of 17 clubs, really looking for the top 1 or 2 jobs nationwide. I was very fortunate and lucky, that the new CEOs, when they found out that I was interested in that kind of jump, really helped me out and kind of training me for that position. So I did get within the top 2 in about 4 or 5 different places nationwide. And I came to Muncie. I interviewed here, and it was an attractive option for me to come out here. I knew a little bit about some of the personal issues that had gone on, because the Boys and Girls Club of America has a great network of disseminating information. And especially for us in Philadelphia, we were just recovering with the Jerry Sandusky stuff over at Penn State. So we had taken the forefront really in kind of child safety and an appropriate conversation. So a lot of that information came our way. So there was that issue. There was the issue when I met with the board of directors here that a lot of boards would have just, with some of the issues we had, kind of stepped back and said, okay, we're just going to stay doing what we do. And they saw an opportunity. Hey, we are going to be bringing in somebody new. Let's just start completely over and really turn around programming. And then I met with the staff here. And when I asked the staff what they were looking for, what did they need from a new CEO, it was all about they needed a little bit of direction and permission to do more for the youth in Muncie. So with a board and a staff that was really hungry to work with the kids in this city, to me that was, well, I can come in with a book of programming because that's what I do. And if the ultimate goal is to work with kids, that's why I'm here. So to have all of those pieces kind of coming together made it the perfect fit.
Well, the next question is really a time frame question, which is really a little unfair because you haven't been here that long. But I assume, given the kind of person you are, you've done a lot of research on this, because the question really addresses how the services that, in this case, the Boys and Girls Club has offered, how they've changed in the last couple of decades. I mean, this is a period of time where, as you're well aware by now, I mean, Muncie has suffered incredible economic job loss, economic decline. And I just wonder, as you look at the Boys and Girls Club, whether it's here or the Boys and Girls Club nationally or other responsibilities you've had, say, around Philadelphia, what changes have occurred in that period?
Well, nationally, we as an organization, the nationwide organization, has really studied this. It's one of the good things about being a part of one of the biggest child care nonprofits in the world, is we saw that, kind of the way that we were promoting people to take these top jobs was we were finding people who were good program people and putting in their time and paying their dues and promoting them up. And as a good program person, I appreciate that. But there are a whole bunch of skills needed beyond that. I was a teacher for a long time, that the best principals are not always the best teachers. The best teachers don't always grow into that kind of management level. So that was something that we saw as an organization, nationwide. In my time, in my 13 years with the clubs, I was coming in just as a lot of fundraising things were changing. So my old club in Philadelphia was built in 1946 by a man named John Haas, who owned a chemical plant in Northeast Philadelphia. And he had a kid, and he wanted someplace for his kids to play ball after school. So he built the club. And he basically, gave it to the Boys and Girls Club of Philadelphia. And so even, up until a couple of years into my tenure in Philadelphia, John Haas was still alive. And if we ever found ourselves in a really tight spot, we could call John Haas and he'd help us out. But I came in at a time where that wasn't happening anymore. You didn't have the John D. Rockefellers. You didn't have the John Haases anymore. You didn't, even all of these, privately started companies where the CEO was the owner of it and could say, I really care about this. What do you need? Here's a check for $5,000 to $5 million. Everything was becoming much more institutionalized. So, whether it was grant-based funding or it was even corporate giving, there needed to be a return on investment. So there was the publicity aspect. If you sponsor this program, we'll have your name up in lights. But beyond that, they wanted to know that that if we're going to give money to the Boys and Girls Club, why don't we give money to Big Brothers or the YMCA? Both of whom are also great organizations, but we want to know, what are you doing that they're not doing? How do we know your programs are working? So it's great. We run Power Hour programming here. That's 45 minutes a day of homework help and small group tutoring. Now, the old way of funding a nonprofit would be to say, we're serving 250 kids a day and we're giving 45 minutes a day of homework help. And these are the numbers, this is the information that we're putting in. When I came into the movement, the questions started to become, okay, well, what are the outcomes for these kids? Okay, you're putting in the time, and that's great. You're putting in the effort, and we applaud that, but effort doesn't always follow, results don't always follow. So really we were now gearing towards, as a nationwide movement, how do we track what we're doing? How do we track what works? So that was a big part of my job in Philadelphia for the last 5 years, was one, making sure that we were tracking every program that we were running, but then also just, crunching those numbers. I'm a bit of a numbers nerd, so I love that. I love having numbers, one, to find out what's popular. If you give me a daily attendance sheet, I can tell you what programs are working and what programs aren't, because we get more kids on those days. If we have pre and post tests for everything that we do, we can follow and see, okay, what's effective, what's not, what should we expand out, what should we kind of close down. So here, last school year, 60% of our kids improved their reading and math scores by an average of 20%. We would not have been able to tell you that 3 years ago.
I was going to ask,
And 20 years ago, nobody would have been, a school would have been able to tell you that. But really, that was about it. This year, I have the up to, from, January to October, 71% of our kids improved their reading and math scores. 31% increase on math and a 17% increase on reading. So again, kind of taking that move of, here's the work that we're putting in. Now we have the outcomes. Here's the effect that it's having on the kids who come to our clubs.
So what you were doing back in the East, you brought here.
Yes.
Which really, at least at some level, hadn't been done previously.
We had not been doing, it was the change, I think the change from national filtered down to the big cities a little bit quicker. But also as management changed, because the CEO I was hired under had been a program guy. He'd been a club kid, worked his way up as a program guy. By the time he left the clubs, he had been with the clubs for 25, 30 years. And so that changeover happened slowly. What was happening is, as CEOs were retiring, and the organization was bringing in new ones, one of the things the national organization did was, after I'd been here about 3 months, they flew me down to Atlanta for a week of classes on, these are the things you need to know how to do. And then they flew us out again 6 months later. So one, the change kind of happened slowly. It hadn't been happening here, in part because we didn't really have Boys and Girls Club people here before me. We had one a few CEOs ago, but there things had changed. The way that we did work changed. The function of a club is ultimately to be a safe place for kids. And what was necessary for safety in 1950 and 1960 and 70 and 80s to today has changed. There used to be a time when what a club did was we were a safe place for a kid to go after school by opening the doors and giving them a meal, and coaching them in some things, and, in respect, in responsibility, in checking with a kid at that point. Hey, did you do your homework? How'd you do on that spelling test? That was enough when there was more of a community involved in all of those things as well. As the country has changed and as our society has changed, a lot of those other community supports have stopped. So it's not good enough for me now to say, hey, did you do your homework before going out to the basketball court? Now I want to check and make sure that you did your homework. Now I want to check and make sure not only that you did your homework, but you did it right. Did you do the best you could? Is my handwriting is horrendous. So the number of times that I probably got away with just, kind of scribbling something, okay, take your time, slow down, do it the right way.
So it's an incredible amount of what I call almost sea change in the accountability that you do. That really wasn't true a couple of decades ago.
Right. There was, and I think, I think it because I started in early childhood education, and as a man that didn't look like Mr. Rogers, there's a very clear picture of what an early childhood teacher is, and I am not it. So I faced early on in that the kind of questions about, okay, well, I could send my kid in your class, or I can make a stink and get them over to that other class. So I had the understanding very early on that I needed to show that I was good. And so there were people who, kind of needed a little more convincing because of me. And then there were people who saw it, right off the bat. But I understood, and every year that I've taught, I've always said to people, I understand that when you leave your child with me or at my school or with my club, that you are leaving the most precious thing you have. And I've always understood that, if your car breaks down, you don't drop it off with the first mechanic you come to. You shop around and you find the right one. And that's just your car.
That's a Jerry Seinfeld approach.
Right. I mean, yes, if your car is on fire, you don't really care. But if you need a tune-up, or if if you're looking for a place to live, if you're looking to buy a new car, whatever it is, you shop around and find the best value for your dollar. The same is true should be true for childcare. And so the ability to say, I am aware of the responsibility of the just what you are leaving with me when you leave your child at one of my programs. And it's one, thankfully, I've never stopped worrying about it. I constantly want to make sure that I and the programs that we're running and the staff that we have are worthy of that great responsibility. And just what a gift it is that somebody says, I could go here, there, anywhere else, but I'm choosing to send my child with you.
Okay. Well, having said that, macro question, then what would you say, you meet a guy on the street, me, what are the main goals of your organization?
I want, at the end of the day, our mission, is to enable all young people, especially those who need us most, to reach their full potential as professional, caring, and responsible citizens. So to me, I look at that, I break that down in a few different ways. One is to enable the young people. We don't give them the tools that they need. We show them the tools and we say, here are the tools. Whether you use them or not is up to you. One of the big discussions in the movement is, what does especially those who need us most mean? And I think that there's a picture of, a young man living, being raised by a single mother who's working 3 jobs. And those kids certainly need us most. They do. But I look at myself and, my mother was a doctor. My father is a lawyer. We had an extended professional family that cared for me and my brother. But my brother and I were smart enough to get by doing shoddy work in school and get B's and C's and a few A's without actually ever having to work for it. We could have used a club. kind of to teach us that next level. We were both good athletes, but we were good athletes in Hollis, Queens. If we had had a club that wasn't in the Bronx, which is where the clubs in New York City right now are up in the Bronx and the upper west side of Manhattan, which would have been a little bit far for us to get to. We could have used that camaraderie. We could have used that teamwork and all of that. So even kids like us who grew up in an upper middle class family, there were needs that the club could provide that our families didn't. So there's that. And then there's reaching their full potential.
Yeah.
I think everybody who has kids has a hope for what their kid is going to become. They look at their son or daughter when they're born, and I want you to, for my dad it was, because he grew up in the Kennedy era as a Jew, I want my boys to grow up to be the Jewish Kennedys.
Yeah.
That wasn't the direction that we were heading in. I'm probably a little closer to it than my older brother, but we wanted different things for our lives and still do. I think my dad's very proud of both of us because we took the skills that we had and we took the tools that we had and we found the direction we wanted to move in. And so it's never about where you end up, but are you doing your best? So one of the questions we ask when a kid, tries something new is, especially, it works here really well on the basketball court. At the end of the game, there's a scoreboard and there's a winner and a loser.
Right.
What we don't want from our kids is, well, I was on the losing team, therefore this game was a failure. What we want our kids to know is, and what we as adults want to know, did you have fun?
Yeah.
Did you do your best? What did you do well? What didn't you do well that you can do better next time? And if you can answer those questions, especially the last three, with a yes, yes, I did my best.
Right.
Here's something that went right for us as a team. Here's something I can do better tomorrow or in the next game. If you can answer those questions, then it wasn't a failure. Even if you lost, 15, by 15 points, by 20 points. Yeah. If you did your best and you learned something, you can it was a success.
Well, if those are the main goals of your organization with these young people, what challenges, as far as they're concerned, are you trying to address?
I think one of the things that I think the overarching thing that I see is a lack of knowledge on how to find hope. So one of the things I know about the city and the Midwest and really society in general is there used to be a path for people who were not college types,
right?
Which was a lot of us. That there were manufacturing jobs.
Oh yeah, especially here.
Yeah, especially in the Midwest,
right.
And especially here in Muncie, where you could leave high school right. and make a good middle class living doing something. Now those jobs we still do have pathways to that here in Muncie. What my families don't see is how do we get there? They don't see those opportunities. Right. So I talk with our teens. What are you going to do after high school? And we actually start that conversation when the kids are in kindergarten. Right. We have a program called What's Your Year? So from the first day of school, what year are you going to graduate high school? Yeah. And just do the math from I'm 5 years old in 2018, so that means I'll be 18 in 2031. Okay, and they've just thinking that far ahead, and then ask what do you want to do after that? Now we know that answer is going to change, and I always tell the kids when I grew up I wanted to play third base for the Red Sox, but I'm 5'7". I'm left-handed.
In New York City?
In New York City, I can't root for home teams, but I'm 5'7". I'm left-handed. I am not going to play third base for the Red Sox, but it was still a dream of mine. Yeah. And then I was going to become a lawyer, and then I was going to run, for political office. None of those things have happened. I changed my mind a number of times along the way, and that's fine. And that's a good thing. So I never want that kid's answer to be, the same throughout. I want them to be okay with changing it. When I talk with our teens, what are you going to do after high school? We have a few. I'm going to go to college, and then I'm going to go off to
Right.
the NBA or be a professional musician, which are great goals.
Yeah.
But most of us are not going to become a professional musician or an NBA basketball player. Or even when I talk to them about going to college, most of them talk about Ball State, which is a great school. But that doesn't mean it's the right school for everybody.
Right.
Ivy Tech is a wonderful school. And if you don't know what you want to study, you are probably, you are financially a whole lot better off to spend 2 years at Ivy Tech and then transfer on to a Ball State or a Northwest or wherever you want to go. So there's that. They just don't see that opportunity. Then I talk to the kids who don't, they want to get to work tomorrow because they want to help support their families or they're just done with school, which is a feeling I understand very well. Talk to them, okay, well, what do you want to do? What kind of job are you going to get? And the answer is, well, Wendy's is hiring and McDonald's is hiring. And I think that those are great jobs. I really do. They are not careers for 99% of the people who get into them. If restaurant management is something you want to get into, then yes, that's an amazing way to work your way up. But if you're still at the front line, when you're my age, I don't want to say you've done anything wrong, because if you're working hard, to support your family and doing it the right way, then that's a positive. But that's not a pathway to success. So I go around town and I speak with people. I was speaking with some people from Mercix, that they're hiring, 20 people a day just to do their overnight shift. Yeah. And you can get a middle class salary out of that with opportunity for growth. My families don't see those opportunities. They don't see the opportunities to go to a Mercix or to go to an Old National Bank or anything like that. I think what I want to do as well is expand that out to some of the smaller businesses that we have. Whether it is, sight and sound music. I've got kids who want to go into music for a living. I play a few instruments. I'm okay. I was never going to hit it big. I'm just not good enough. And even if I were, it's very difficult, to hit that kind of thing. But if you can get a job and learn how to repair guitars at Sight and Sound Music, how to repair an amplifier or a microphone, your opportunity to make a living, and to stay in a field that you love, even though it's behind the camera and not in front of the camera, you're much more likely to be able to get a job doing that. The same holds true with MITS is always looking for mechanics. Sure. Ivy Tech has a welding program that they run. That information, they do their best to get that information out to people. So I don't want to fault anybody on the information not being out there. But one of the things I've seen and been struck by in 2018 is the number of times I'll try to share that information with people, and they'll flat out say, they don't mean me. And I know that they do. MITS doesn't care. If you can fix an engine, they don't.
What do you think the cause of the disconnect is? Because 20 years ago, a kid graduates from Southside High School, Central, but certainly on this side of town, and they got a job at Gear, making a good amount of money, or at Muncie Chevrolet or at Delco. For some reason, in that intervening 2-decade time period, the people you're talking about no longer even see that.
Right.
They don't see themselves going to work for a Mercix or the other kind of jobs that are here that are halfway decent jobs from an economic standpoint, and that's what's been lost.
Right. Some of it's racial. Some of it is economic and socioeconomic beyond simply the race. I think that Muncie is one of the most studied cities in the country.
It is the most studied.
Yeah. I couldn't remember if that was accurate anymore.
Yeah, it is. It still is.
So I think it's a microcosm to a lot of the economics that I studied.
Right.
Just because I was interested in that kind of thing. That when the factory jobs left, you'd have politicians come out and say, "Well, I'm going to bring the factory jobs back."
Right.
Well,
We went through a whole, at least a decade where people
Right.
thought they were going to come back.
Right.
We lost those jobs. Well, then why don't you city fathers go find some more
Right.
like that?
and some of it was moving to other countries. Some of
Yeah.
it was, computerization.
Yeah.
That the jobs were not being filled by people. So a lot of those jobs are just not going to come back. But when the factories closed down, a lot of people, whether it was government, with unemployment benefits, which was a real need,
Right.
People saying, well, there will be a new factory opening up in
Right.
6 months to a year.
Right.
Well, by the time, and then it's 10 years later,
Yeah, okay.
and if there is a new factory that opens up, well, your skills now are out of date. Or, they're coming in from another place, and they already have their management type people, and they're going to be
Right.
able to get,
Yeah.
somebody younger for cheaper. So I think it's really, a lot of it's those entry level jobs that people don't,
Right.
don't get. And then what's happened is that first wave came through, and that first wave of people were hired, and it left a lot of people out. And then, the culture becomes one of, they don't mean me,
Oh, okay.
or they don't mean people like me. And I see that most starkly racially, but I don't think it's only racial. I think that there's just a whole class of people that don't. Now, I know, because I run in both of those circles, that they do mean people like you.
Right.
But that's another way that the club can be helpful to both sides. There is, those kids feel comfortable here. They know I mean them when I say you're welcome here. So let me take you over this other place that you think they don't mean you, and kind of make that introduction.
Okay.
So that's one of the things I've been working on hard for the last year.
So it's a transitional thing.
Yes,
Okay.
I think so.
This is a big switch, but I've been asking all of the people I've interviewed this question, and I get interesting answers. But have you had any problems finding staff or people that would have the kind of expertise you need here?
Yes and no. One is, we're a nonprofit that works with children.
Right.
So the pay is, we can't afford to compete with a Walmart.
Right.
We can't even, a lot of times, compete with a McDonald's or a Wendy's for people with an after-school job. But what I've always said, in New York City, you had to have a master's degree to teach even 2-year-olds, which was my specialty.
Right.
When I moved to Philadelphia, it started to become a bachelor's degree. And now here it's, right now it's an associate's degree.
Right.
It'll be moving, I think, to a bachelor's degree going forward. But what I always wanted through all of those things as a manager was, if you give me somebody who really wants to do their best, I can train anybody in anything that I know. If you show me somebody who's hungry to do a job well, then I don't really care too much about the education level. So, finding the right staff is difficult, because you have an hour-long interview at most. And really what we're looking for are you here to do whatever you can to enrich these children's lives? And then, Sue Godfrey, who's the CEO of the Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I joke a lot that our two agencies get mixed up for one another, and that's a nationwide thing.
Yeah.
That I'll get people who come here who really want to do one-on-one mentoring with people. And so one of the other sea changes that's happening, I think, with some managers is, when I was younger, that would have offended me. Okay, you came in here thinking you were getting Big Brothers, so I'm going to try to mold you into a Boys and Girls Club person.
Oh, okay.
Now it's, you know what? I am better off if I send you over to Big Brothers Big Sisters, because they're better off because they have the right person for the job. You're better off because you're doing the job that's right for you. And I'm better off because we serve similar populations. And if you're helping my kids there, then my kids are better off, and that's a success for me, even if I didn't do it.
Okay. Talk a little bit about the scope of the Boys and Girls Club in Muncie has changed so much over the past, again, probably a couple decades.
It has changed dramatically over the past 3 years.
Okay.
So right now we're sitting in the Madison Street Clubhouse. This is what people think of when they think of the Boys and Girls Club
right.
of Muncie. Because for 82 years, it was.
Right.
This was all we had. And it was a nice building, and it still is. And it served what we needed. 3 years ago, really probably a little closer to 2.5 years ago, the club was serving 75 kids a day in this building. By the time I was interviewing for this job in August of 2017, we were seeing about 115 kids a day, because we had expanded into East Washington Academy and Southside Middle School. And at this point, we're seeing 250 kids a day. We're seeing about 185 in this building alone every single day. So, just in terms of sheer numbers, we've tripled our numbers in that time. So now, when I say I'm with the clubs, it's 5 clubs. We've merged with the Roy Bewley Center, which is over in the Whiteley community. Right. So that was a bridge right there. Is that the south side of Muncie and Whiteley did not always play nicely together. Right. So I'm proud to be a part of kind of helping build that bridge. And we took on their CEO as my COO, Kiana Clemens. Right. I think it just shows that partnership right there just shows how these kind of partnerships can work. Because I am much better off having her here helping our kids. And I think she's better off being here with the national, support that we have. One of the other things that we've done is I talked a little bit about the early history of the Boys and Girls Club, that, we were a safe place for kids. We'd open up the doors for kids for 3 hours and give them a meal, and they'd be safe for those 3 hours. Well, our goal now is we want them to be safe when they've aged out of our program. So what that means is, we've got to help them with their homework and help them do better in school. Because the schools are doing a fine, there's a lot of turmoil there, but they're doing a fine job with the actual education of children. But they can't do it on their own. Parents don't have the time. They're working 2 or 3 jobs. They don't have the education. Even if they are college graduates, we've changed the way we teach math. And I've had to take classes in how to teach the new math, because the old way, even if we'd get the right answer, is now wrong, because you did it the wrong way. So there's that. There's also the opportunity, the character building, that there used to be a large community that taught young men what it means to be a man, that taught young women what it means to be a woman, the personal responsibility, the respect that one is owed and owes to others. A lot of that, just when there are no jobs, that becomes a secondary concern. So we try to help with that. Then one of the other things, and it's important to me, I tell this story a lot. One of the things my father did when my brother and I were young, about 6 and 8, was every other weekend he'd force us to put on a jacket and tie and go to the Brooklyn Academy of Music to listen to classical music. And I hated him. I hated him for that. And I would curse him. One, it was 8 o'clock in the morning and I'm wearing a jacket and tie. And now I'm going to listen to classical music. And I didn't really enjoy that. But I learned a lot from that. One, I learned about classical music. And as a musician myself, I can really appreciate now what I heard 38 years ago. But I also learned I knew how to tie a tie from early on. I am not uncomfortable in a sport jacket and slacks. I learned how to sit through 2 hours of what was, to me, the most boring thing on the face of the earth and not show it. These are skills that one needs if one is going to get a job. You need to be able to sit in a staff meeting that is boring you to tears and still look interested. So that's one of the things that we try to do with our kids is not bore them to tears, but expose them to opportunities that they wouldn't get otherwise. So, we run a robotics program, we run a dance team, we run a music program. All of these things are in partnership with other people. So I like to use our music club as an example. We are actually teaching kids how to play guitar and drums. For a family to go out and spend the money
Yeah,
to
you can't
hire
do
a
it.
music
Yeah.
teacher. It's not doable.
No.
And if you don't know that you have the interest, it's not worth the time. We partner with the Ball State professor who says, you know, give us $100
Yeah.
for the instruments and we'll come in and volunteer our time. And this way, for $15 a year, you can try it out. You know, you're not out anything because they're after school members. But then if we find after a year or two that we've got 2 kids who want to continue on with that music education, it's going to have a world of effect on them. And we've given them an opportunity to get outside of their little bubble. With our robotics team, who will be competing on Saturday for their first time, these are kids who are, you know, they're taught how to build one robot, and then they're told, okay, here's the competition. Your robot needs to do these 20 things, and this is what you get points on.
Yeah.
Build the robot.
Yeah.
Design it. And so these kids now have to actually take these points, and there are some things you have to give up a point here to get 3 points there. So they've got to figure that out. They've got to figure out how to put the robot together. They've got to, you know, and there are 2 competitions. There's one, a remote controlled competition
Right.
where they guide the robot to do the things. And then there's one where they have to have coded the
I
robot.
know.
So they're being taught coding skills.
I've gone to these things.
Right. I mean, it's the you know, the sheer breadth of things that we're teaching kids just with that one little program that we do in partnership with TechWise Academy. So they're donating their time to run these programs. These are things that, again, you know, TechWise does their classes every, you know, at least once a month that are free to kids, you know, but to get kids in there, you know, it's a struggle for them sometimes because, again, my family say they don't mean me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, now the founder is there working with those kids. Well, now you know he means you because you know him, you see him. He's there rooting you on. You know, so what we do programmatically is, you know, we sit down as a team. What do we think our kids need to succeed? Because they can't be safe until they're some form of success, whether it's a lot of money or a steady job that they're working hard at. The other is, you know, we start with, what did I have as a kid that I want these kids to have? What didn't I have as a kid that I want these kids to have? What opportunities can we do that? And the great thing about Muncie is, you know, with all of these programs that we're running now, very few of them hit our bottom line.
Right.
Because we find somebody else who really has a passion for teaching these kind of skills. They just don't have a building or they don't have kids. And we come together and I say, hey, you want to teach music?
Yeah.
I want my kids to know music. Here you go.
That works.
You know, and it's great for our kids because it just gives them a lot of skills that they might not otherwise have.
But what's your budget currently?
Our budget is about $750,000.
Okay. Sources of funding?
Our source, Ball Brothers Foundation is a huge supporter. You know, George and Francis Ball, the Community Foundation are all supporters. Right now, we are about 80% grant funded.
Okay.
You know, all of our programs run for $15 a year per child.
Is that true nationally, by the way? I mean, as far as that kind of funding with boys and girls?
You know, it really depends on the location.
Okay.
So back in Philadelphia, we had some fee-for-service programs. So our preschools were all fee-for-service, which meant, you know, we charged anywhere from $200 a week down to $150 a week per child for preschool care. Now, we got money from the government for a lot of those. A lot of our families were on some sort of public assistance. So almost nobody actually paid those figures. Our after-school funding, you know, again, we were a licensed site, so, you know, our base rate was $115 a week per child. But then we would go out, you know, get a lot of grant funding. We were very good at raising individual funds. And that's one of the things I do miss about New York and Philadelphia is that, you know, there are so many people there that it's easier to tap into different pockets. You know, the national idea, what they want us to be at is, you know, no sources over 25%.
Okay.
So they'd like us to be 25% grant funded, 25% by special events, 25% by individual gives.
Oh, okay.
That is not going to happen in this city.
No, I know. Yeah.
You know, I'd be a little bit more comfortable with 50% grant funded.
Okay.
You know, and reach out for special events and our individual ask to cover the rest of it.
Okay.
Because we do. You know, our income is $15 per child per year, and we run about $4,000 worth of programming for each child per year.
Yeah.
So right now, you know, one of the great things about Muncie is we have some very generous foundations.
Right.
You know, that all they want to see is they want to see results.
Right.
And they want to make sure that you're good stewards for the money.
Right.
You know, and beyond that, we have a very generous population.
True.
Again, compared to the economics I grew up with in New York and Philadelphia, the people in Muncie are struggling, you know, financially. But the sheer number of people who give,
Right.
you know, is as a percentage of this population.
Yeah.
You know, people who, I had a kid who last year at our Great Futures Breakfast, one of our teens, you know, was so inspired by what he was hearing about what we were doing. He dropped $10 in the kitty.
Yeah.
You know, and that's an hour and a half of work for him.
Yeah.
You know, that he gave to us, and there are thousands of stories like that around this city. You know, so we've also, one of the other things we've done is, you know, when I got here, we were writing grants for the local foundations, but we're running national programs.
Right.
You know, and so we've expanded out on that as well to leverage that Boys and Girls Club name out, you know, beyond just the city of Muncie.
But are you always in a cycle then of writing grant proposals?
We've gotten much better at that. You know, so one of the things I've learned is I was not a grant writer, you know, to start with. And then in Philadelphia, you know, as we started the preschools in Philadelphia because the United Way, you know, in the mid 90s had a large pot of money for that. And there was a big push nationwide to get early childhood centers out there. So the United Way went to the Boys and Girls Club and said, we're going to give you a whole bunch of money to start these programs. And I'm grateful for that because otherwise I would not have found my way into the movement. But there wasn't, again, you know, there wasn't that move to accountability. There wasn't that move to, you know, we looked and we saw a need. What we didn't see was there an interest? Did the people we were serving actually see this need?
Right.
You know, we were competing against extended families.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the way it's been for 200 years. And there's a huge upside to an extended, you know, to a grandparent or an uncle or aunt watching after the kids. But educationally, you know, unless we can train those grandparents and uncles and aunts, it does leave a lot of children behind. So we ended up having to close a few of our preschools because there just wasn't the infrastructure there. So when I became a preschool director, I had to start writing a few more grants to do that. And I did every one by hand at the time when it came up. Well, one of the things that we're seeing here in Muncie, and I think Muncie is a perfect microcosm of it, is that because we have 4 or 5 foundations that really fund a lot of us, you know, and very strongly, you know, there's comfort in numbers. You know, so if I'm running a program that costs us $50,000, you know, you feel more comfortable giving us $25,000 if we're getting another 5 from here and another 10 from there and another, you know, so that it's covered, you know, and that there are more people really trying to make these things work. So it's not just the Boys and Girls Club running this. We're working with other people, that it's not just, you know, the Ball Brothers Foundation is funding this, but the United Way sees, you know, a value in this, and George and Francis and Schaefer and all of them. So we've done a little bit of that we've become much more intentional on how we're writing grants. All right, we have this program we want to run. It is going to cost us $15,000. Here are the grants we can go for. And we probably need, if we're running a $15,000 program, we probably need $100,000 worth of grants out there, you know, to get that $15,000. So this way, one, I can go to my board and say, okay, we want to do this thing here. We want to run this robotics program. I already have $5,000 from this grant, and I've written for another $25,000 from this grant. But if we don't get it, we need to, you know, are we going to make the choice to either run this program or not. And if we're going to, then that means we need to raise the rest of the money. So I want to be able to have the budget be somewhat modular. And so that means a lot of the grants that we write need to become somewhat modular. We're running national programs. My background is at Boys and Girls Club. So I have the nationwide research on this. We are doing on a regular basis the very local research on what our outcomes are. But now we have all of this data. Let's put the data in. Okay. So Amy Gibson and I will sit down with Kiana and kind of say, okay, there's this grant out here, and it's for arts programming. Who else is writing arts programming? So now we have all of the information. Now it's, okay, so we're going to put this piece on the budget for this grant and this piece on the budget for that grant. For some of the newer things, so, in the year I've been here, we've been talking with Big Brothers, Big Sisters about not a merger, but a partnership. That there are ways that we can work together to help one another. For something like that that's totally new, we don't have that data. Right. So there it is much more now sitting down and, okay, let me get my researcher hat out. Let me get my typing hat out. Let me get my dust off my journalism degree and, write this down. But for a lot of the other things, it's sort of, hey, these are the programs that we're running. Do you want to get on board? Yeah. And here's what it's going to look like at the end of the day. Here's, when we decided our music program, to run that, we all thought it was a great idea. But then we had to figure out, what do we want to achieve? What's our bare minimum to achieve to make this worthwhile? Yeah. Because, yes, it's great to say, well, 2 out of 250 kids now can play the guitar pretty well. That's a pretty good outcome. But at what cost? There's a cost-benefit ratio that we need to figure out. How do we know whether this is worth keeping going? So whether it's, that there's a high correlation between music lessons and mathematical ability. Sure. So, okay, what kind of GPA, what kind of math scores jump do we want to see to make this worthwhile? How many kids need to be involved in this to make it worthwhile? Because my social heart says, if one kid, but that one kid is taking resources from. Yeah. So, okay, we need to have a minimum of 15 signed up and 10 going every week. Yeah. We want, by the end of it, how many songs should they know how to play? Yeah. Our goal is, I'd love them to be able to play a 2-hour concert. Yeah, right. That's probably not realistic. Yeah. Can we get them to 3 songs? Can we get them to knowing how to play 2 songs that somebody else wrote and 1 song of their own? And then sometimes you get surprised. So like with our robotics programming, by the challenge, they're supposed to have coded a robot. About 2 months earlier, so this was last month, they found out they didn't like the way the controller was working. So they asked Ryan, who's running the program, they said, can we get a new controller? He said, you don't need to. You can recode this one. And so they've recoded the controllers. So that was something that we were looking at as an end result that we had about halfway through the program. But we want, if, again, I think robotics is a wonderful thing. I think dance is a wonderful thing. But we need to be able to know at the end of that time, was it worth this $15,000 that maybe we could have spent somewhere else? So we need to have those minimums. We need to have those, this is what we really want. And then we want to have those dreams. Yeah. Wow, that was really a top-notch program. It's worth trying to triple the budget for that.
Is Boys and Girls Club impacted much by local, state, and federal regulations?
Somewhat. Okay. We do get a few federal grants. We have a good partnership with the Indiana Coalition of Boys and Girls Club. More at the national level than anywhere else. Back east in Philadelphia, there was a lot more, of local regulation on things. One of the big ones is, the way society is changing is the view of marijuana is very different than it was. States and cities and states and the federal government are very slow to change their perspective on that. Yeah. So we drug test all of our employees. Okay. We cannot have an employee in the school that tests positive for pot.
Okay.
Now, part of that is, of course, there's simply a rule. This is the law. You have to follow the law.
Okay.
You know, and I absolutely support that. There are states though where it is legal, you know, to do some sort of cannabis.
Yeah.
But the federal government has said if you want federal money, you cannot be in a public school, you know, with this as a background. So, you know, things like that. I don't really have an issue with it because it's illegal. So if you come back positive, I'm not going to hire you anyway. But it is something I'm looking down the road at, that either if I move out of this state or if the state, you know, at some point decides that medical marijuana or, you know, recreational is, these are things we need to keep an eye on. Funding is always an issue. So the way that governments are funding, you know, I'm a politics junkie as well, you know, so I love national politics. But the funding, you know, that comes out of the federal government really filters down to state and local. Right now, because we had kind of made a mess of things, we weren't getting those dollars, so them going away was not an issue for us. But now we are starting to get those federal dollars back, so I do have to be concerned about the future of, you know, of those monies going away. We are affected in some ways as well. There's a program, a federal program called 21st Century, you know, which is money that's geared towards programs like ours that work with the schools. Because of the turmoil the schools were in, the federal government this year pretty much just said, nope, nobody's getting it.
You mean schools nationally?
The schools in this city. So, you know, what happens is I wrote a grant and said, this is how we partner with Muncie Community Schools. And these are the programs we want to run. And there were two ways that we missed out on those funds. One was I went a couple of lines over on the 2-page minimum for everything. That was just my stupid. But then the other was that the federal government, because of the turmoil that Muncie Community Schools was in financially, again, not programmatically, they, you know, it was kind of a, let's wait and see how this turns out. So nobody in the city at that point got those funds. You know, so again, that's a way that kind of the city and state governance affects what we do. What also happens is, one of the, you know, I notice I've been through school budget shakeups before, you know, and what happens is as accountability grows, the accountability is in reading, math, and now science. In every other location I've lived in is then the arts get cut, physical activity gets cut, history gets cut. Okay, so here we have the arts getting cut. We don't so much have physical activity getting cut. So what we do, because at the end of the day, Muncie Community School kids are our kids, whether they come to the club or not. Because the best indicator for how a kid is going to do in school is how the kid sitting on either side of him is doing in school. So if the school needs extra help, then I need to know what that extra help is so we can provide it. It takes a village, but the village has to communicate with one another.
So it's a coordination thing.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any specific ties with faith communities as far as your programs?
You know, we do get supported by faith communities. The Boys and Girls Club started, not quite as a faith community, but by some people of faith. We are not tied to any particular religion. So our code, you know, separate from our mission, is, you know, I believe in God and the right to worship as I see fit. So, you know, I grew up as an ethnic Jew. I am not very much a person of faith. Kiana Clemens is very much a person of faith. But what we both agree on, you know, no matter who one wishes to pray to or not pray to, is that we are going to respect every faith that comes in. You know, and that we want our kids to respect, you know, whether it's based on ethnicity, national origin, faith, sexual orientation, race, whatever it is, you know, it's what I love about this country is it's been described as, you know, a gorgeous mosaic. And we've very rarely actually lived up to that ideal, but it is something that we're always striving towards. And the clubs, I think, especially embody that. So we do get support from faith-based organizations, and we are respectful of faith, but we are non-denominational.
Those are all the formal questions I have, but I always give my person I'm doing the interviews with an opportunity to add. anything you would like that perhaps we didn't cover. So this is your opportunity to get a few more elements in here if you wish.
Well, that's a tough one. I think that, I speak, you and I were talking before this about, kind of a New York transplant to Muncie.
Yeah.
And I know I heard from all of the people that I grew up with on the East Coast, really? Why?
Yeah.
And I know I heard from the side here, from people on the board of the Boys and Girls Club here, how are we going to entice this big city boy out here?
Yeah.
13 months in, best move I've ever made.
Good.
That this city is, really a wonderful place to get involved. That in my 13 months here, I've been introduced into so many different areas of the city. And there are so many people, much like the hunger I saw from the staff and the board of directors, there is a huge amount of hunger in this city amongst the city leaders, if that's, the term we want to use, to make the city better for all of the people here. And, I think one of the good things, we have a few other recent transplants, whether it's me or Chad with the YMCA or President Mearns at Ball State, all three of us from the East Coast, that there's also now a little bit more willingness to say, okay, what are the ideas? And we can, because so many of us have been here for 25 years and a few of us have been here for less than 5, there's not that history. And there's a little bit more willingness to say, let me listen to the idea as opposed to, the mouth that it's coming out of. There's a great opportunity for the kind of teamwork that we had been lacking a little bit. I really see that turning around, and so I think we're at a point where we're about ready to take off, in part because of that.
Well, I agree with you, but I'm very biased. I think it's a matter of perspective. I think that the community needs perspectives of people who come from different places like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the interview.
Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure.